Well, Phil, first things first, your brother Benny was 16 years older than you. At what point did you become aware of his racing career, and what kind of impact did that have on you?
The first thing I can remember was when he was racing locally up in Mount Clemens, Michigan. This probably would have been about 1964, so I would have been close to 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. And he won a race at Mount Clemens, and they stop at the start-finish line and do a picture with a trophy and the flag, whatever the case may be. Well, I got in the car with him, and he drove back around to basically the garage area, which was outside turn 3 and 4. And there's nobody on the racetrack, and he got on it pretty good. And I don't remember from that moment on ever wanting to do anything else in my life, literally.
Well, when and where did you start racing?
I never got to do go-kart racing or anything like that. My dad, we had a taxi cab company in Detroit that you're certainly aware of. Benny was busy doing his own deal, so I never had an opportunity to go-kart racing or anything like that. Quarter midgets, I looked at everything and just never did have an opportunity to do that. Didn't have anybody that could help me with that. So I decided when I was probably 16, 17 years old, or maybe even 18 years old, to do the Baby Grand Series that NASCAR had back then. That was a series that was basically started in North Wilkesboro on the road course that they had as part of the drag strip.
Okay.
And then they branched out and they would run Wilkesboro and probably run Hickory, and then NASCAR took it over. So it was a certainly legitimate series back then. So I said, well, I think that's the direction and something that would be affordable to do. So my dad certainly helped with that, and I had met Tex Powell back when Benny started running in the Cup Series in 1970 for LG DeWitt. Tex worked there, and Tex was always so nice to me, and because I was at that time probably 12, 13 years old, and probably as annoying as anybody could be, and but he always took the time and always tried to help me and teach me, answered all my questions. So we remained fast friends that whole time, and I said, Tex, I want to build a Baby Grand car. What do you think? He said, we can do it. So I remember I went to a junkyard in Pontiac, Michigan, and bought a Vega that had been crashed.
A Vega,
yeah.
That had been crashed.
That had been crashed in a junkyard. I paid $450 for it, and we took it down south, and Tex said, "Well, this thing's not that bad." We actually it had hit something in the front, and Tex actually straightened the front bumper. The front bumper that was part of the damage. We ended up using that front bumper on the race car. But I was in Detroit. The problem was I was in Detroit going to school, and Tex's shop was in Asheboro. So every waking moment that I was out of school, any vacation, whether it be Christmas, Easter, and certainly all summer, I would come down south and work on that car. But it took a long time because I'd hung around Benny's shop, but never to the point when he was running back in the ARCA series to go over there and help work on the cars. I was just hung around a little bit, maybe wash some parts or something. So I didn't really know how to work on a race car. But Tex and his son Mike really taught me how to work on a race car. But it just took a long time. It took a couple of years to finally get that car together because we only worked on it when I would be there, and I didn't know much about it, and I was so slow working on things. But we finally got the thing done when I was back in 1977 when I was 20 years old, and we took it to Asheboro. They were running a Baby Grand race at Asheboro. Lance Childress was the series director at that time,
Okay.
Kip's dad.
Yeah,
And we took the car and we went through inspection, and Lance said, we just can't let you run this car. It's you really stretched the rule book with this car. Now, obviously, I can't take any credit or blame for that because, well, I can take some of the blame. Can't take any of the credit for it. But Tex said, when we're building this car, I want it to be the fastest thing that's ever been. That was our goal. So we we stretched, interpreted the rules, and it didn't. Lance didn't like it, and but at the time there were a lot of cars there, and Lance said, "I'll tell you what, if you and Tex will both sign a letter here saying that you can run the qualifying race." They took 16 cars by qualifying, and then the remaining 8 cars the field would be filled through a qualifying race. You can run that qualifying race, but even if you finish in the top 8, which you probably won't, because it's a 15-lap qualifying race.
Yeah.
You're not going to race tonight in the feature. So we did. It was a chance to race, and there were 19 cars in that qualifying race for a 15-lap event, and they took the top 8, and we finished 5th in that. So we passed 14 cars in 15 laps. So, but again, we couldn't race. But so anyway, we had to go back and fix all the stuff that was wrong with it. So.
1982, you got a full-time ride in the first year of what is now the Xfinity Series. How did that deal happen?
It really started back in '81. I ran the Baby Grand Series and basically all of '78 and all of '79. I did it from Detroit, so never ran all the races. Couldn't afford to run all the races, but ran as much as we could. And I ran about 30 races over the course of those 2 years, and felt like it was time to move to the Late Model Sportsman Series in 1980, which was the forerunner of the Busch Series.
Okay, yeah.
So I bought a car, ironically, from Richard Childress. He'd had a late model car, and I bought it from him. And so I started racing out of Texas shop in Asheboro in 1980, and started again in '81. And went broke, basically, pretty early in the year. Just completely ran out of money. Had ramped up a little bit and had a second engine, then blew an engine, and just I remember going to Rockingham, so very early in the year, and racing at Rockingham in the Late Model Sportsman Series, again, prior to the Busch Series forming, and came home. And I had to borrow the money from Benny to pay the tire bill, and the purse didn't quite cover the tire bill. Wow. And I didn't have any money, so basically, I said I don't know what to do. I didn't know where to turn. So I called Humpy Wheeler, who I'd always who'd always give me some very good advice over the years, and I said I really need some help. He said, well, come and see me. He was running Charlotte Motor Speedway at the time, so I went. Humpy had lunch brought in or whatever, and we talked about it. He said, what are your goals? I said, well, my goal is to race. I said, and I told him the story. I said, I had to borrow money from Benny to pay the tire bill, and I don't have any more money. It's hard to find sponsors or whatever. Basically, I probably went to Humpy to say, do you know of any sponsors or whatever? He said, have you ever thought about taking a different tactic than just trying to find sponsorship? Well, I thought about getting a job. He said, well, who would you go get a job with? I said, well, first person I would go to get a job with would be Travis Carter, who was running the new Skull Bandit team for Hal Needham, and that it just formed that year. That was the first year of that. He said, well, I think that would be probably one of the smartest things you've ever done. And he probably knew more about it, but that's what he said. He said, I think that would be one of the smartest things you've ever done. So I was at Charlotte Motor Speedway in Humpy's office, and I left there and went to Travis's shop. And Travis wasn't there, but I met a guy named Johnny Hayes.
There you go.
And so talked to Johnny forever. He said, I know Travis would love to see you and, love to talk to you and whatever. So he's not going to be here the rest of the day, but, come back tomorrow, whatever, to see Travis. But I spent a long time with Johnny, and we just hit it off. I mean,
now, were you talking job or were you talking ride?
Job.
Okay.
Job.
Right.
Strictly job.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they basically had started the Skull Bandit team with Stan Barrett.
Yeah.
And they had run Harry in a race or two that Stan didn't run at that point. So the next day I went back to see Travis and to see Travis. I knew Travis I was there the very first Cup race that Travis ever went to. He went with Benny. in 1970 when Benny first started running for LG. Well, I'm pretty sure it was 1970. And then, and within a year, Travis was the crew chief. I think in 1971, Travis was the crew chief. So I'd known Travis for over 10 years, and we'd always stayed close, even after he'd left Benny and he went to Penske and wherever, Junior Johnson. We always, whenever I would see Travis, I would talk because we'd spent so much time together early on. He said, well, we're thinking about starting a second team. And he said, if we do start a second team, then we're going to need some people, and then I would have a spot for you. So within a couple 3 weeks, they basically decided to start a second team for Harry Gant, which Harry would be full time in the second car. And so Travis said, yeah, when we do that, we'll we got a place for you. So I was going to start the Monday after Darlington, and I scraped together enough money to run my car at Darlington, my sportsman car at Darlington, and then the next day I just hung around and helped in the pits, and then the following Monday after Darlington, which would have been the spring race, the Rebel 500, I went to work for Travis. So it curtailed my racing. I didn't have a whole lot of, and we were running, racing full time. Obviously, had 2 teams, and there was a lot to do. And it wasn't like today. We didn't have 100 people. We probably had about 10 people, yeah. Maybe 12 people to run 2 teams. And I loved it there. But what that led, and I think probably Humpy knew this in the back of his mind, is through that association with Hal Needham and Travis and the Skoll team, I met the people from U.S. Tobacco, Lou and Jenny Bannell, and they over the years became like family. I mean, I had never met a more benevolent person in my lifetime than Lou Bannell, who was the chairman of the board of U.S. Tobacco Company. And so throughout 1981, I ran my car a little bit when I could, and we were getting ready to run a race at Charlotte, and Mrs. Bannell said, Lou, why don't we help him run that race a little bit? So I had
bless her heart.
Totally. And so I had Skoll as a sponsor for my car, and I went to Charlotte to run, and this is probably May. So that's how quickly this happened. I probably went to work there in April, and in May they sponsored me in the May race. And this is when we would have 70, 80 cars show up or whatever, and I qualified 5th among all those cars. And a little side story, Benny was doing the TV. Benny was obviously still racing full time, but he would do one-off deals and do TV. Qualified 5th, and we had a wheel left loose, and I hit the wall. And Benny on TV said, there's my brother Phil. He hadn't run a lick all day, and now he's hit the wall. I said, okay. I said, Benny, please don't help me anymore. don't even talk about me anymore. So, but anyway, that's it. But that's how that relationship began. And then we got down towards the end of the year, and Johnny, who I had become fast friends with, talked U.S. Tobacco into basically starting a Busch team for 1982 because we knew that the Busch Series was coming, and we ended up running the October late model sportsman race. Bought a car from Richard and Leo Jackson, and ran the late model sportsman race in the end of 1981, and got ready to go full time Busch Series racing back in '82 when. So that was a long story to tell you how that ride came about, but all that figured into how that happened, and it was really Johnny Hayes and Lou and Jenny Bannell that made that possible. Johnny mentioned it, and they were on board, and that's how we got going.
You'd better send her a Christmas card every year.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, both Lou and Jenny have passed away, but they were some of the the most important people in my life.
You were pretty good right out of the box that year. You finished 8th at Daytona. You finished 9th at Richmond, and then you win the 3rd race in what is now the Xfinity Series in that division's history at Bristol. And not only do you win that race, you pass David Pearson on the backstretch, and then you hold him off for the last 11 laps.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that day?
It was supposed to be a day race.
Yeah.
And it rained all
Yeah.
day long.
Yeah.
And so we ended up racing it at night. And, I mean, Travis was in the pits with us, calling the shots for me. Benny was there, we had a really good car, qualified well, but I think Jeff Bodine might have had the pole, and he didn't go on the start. So, I may have qualified 7th or 5th or whatever, and the whole inside line didn't go. So, after lap 1, I was way back because that inside line didn't go. But the car was so good, it just kept, picking people through. And I know we had a late caution, and I'm running second to Pearson, and we'd lapped most of the field. Not everybody, I don't think, but we'd lapped most of the field. And I told Travis on the radio, I said, I don't know how I'm going to pass him, but I'm going to do my best. And I think we came off turn 2, and he slipped a little bit, and I was able to get by him. And I think David at the time said they thought there was something on the racetrack, and I think I'm sure there probably was, but we were able to get by him and hold him off. And I mean, I was in shock, literally in shock.
Was that just another race car, or did you consciously say, you know what, I just passed David Pearson?
No, I grew up idolizing those people. I was around them a lot because Benny started running Cup in '70, so I was, every waking moment I could be around the racetrack, I was there. So, I mean, it's one of my idols. Just to get to race against David Pearson was amazing. But to end up beating him essentially was more than I could have ever dreamed for.
How big a deal was that win for you personally and professionally?
Well, I think it was validation. Again, I wanted to do it from the time I was 6 or 7 years old, and it seemed like everything in my life had been leading up to that moment at Bristol when maybe I can do this. Maybe I can make a career out of this, and maybe I am good enough to do what I've always wanted to do. So it meant an awful lot. It sure did.
Was there ever a sense of that moving you from being known as Benny's brother to being known as Phil Parsons' race car driver?
I never thought about it like that,
right.
and it never. I mean, people said, I was known as Benny's younger brother my whole life, and it never bothered me because being compared to somebody that was so well thought of in the sport as Benny, was never anything but a compliment to me.
You were sponsored by Skoll,
Mm-hmm.
which also backed Jack Ingram. Mm-hmm. What kind of relationship did you have with him?
Well, that was before. Jack eventually was sponsored by Skoll, but he was not sponsored by Skoll then.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a few years later, probably by the time when I moved to the Cup Series, so U.S. Tobacco would have a presence in the Busch Series. That's when they sponsored Jack, but.
Well, some Busch Series historian I am.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, Jack Ingram was another hero of mine.
Yeah.
But racing Jack Ingram was hard. It was hard. And I remember going to Langley Speedway that year, and I was really struggling at Langley. And Jack helped me a lot, and I ended up finishing third that night. I'm sure Jack was one of the cars he may have won that night, but I ended up finishing third, and it didn't look like I had a top 10 car in practice. But Jack told me what to do to the car, and we ended up running good. So I just always thought a lot about, he was very gruff or whatever, but I just thought the world of Jack. I really did. He was, all those guys, Jack and Sam and all those people, they never, they never resented me. Every one of them helped me. I never felt like there was any resentment whatsoever. The guy I probably didn't get along with the most was Tommy Ellis, for whatever reason. Just.
That's a shock.
Yeah, terrible Tommy, and it's really funny because we had some battles and some knockdown battles, and I wanted to knock his head off on numerous occasions, and I'm sure him the same. But we were in Daytona a few years ago, and I'm standing there. There was a group of us standing there, and Tommy's there, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe. Now I know this has been a few years ago, so this is 20 years after we. At least 20 years after we battled, tooth and nail or whatever. And I said, I cannot believe Tommy's not even going to acknowledge me standing here. But then he kind of looked at me and said, oh my gosh, Phil, we hugged or whatever. So that was neat. I was glad. Yeah.
Now, Phil, I gotta say I'm disappointed. Yeah. Every single person who has ever mentioned Tommy Ellis on this podcast has done a Tommy Ellis impersonation.
I can't do it. No. I would have to defer to Tony Glover to do a Tommy Ellis impression. He does a good one.
All right. Well, I've got Tony lined up. So
good.
Yeah.
You make sure he does a Tommy Ellis impression.
Now, you did have the opportunity to run your first 5 Winston Cup races in '83. Mm-hmm. Was that just a natural progression with Skoll and moving up the ladder?
Yeah, Johnny Hayes said, why don't we? Well, it even started before that because Benny was racing for Harry Ranier in 1982, and Harry Ranier decided to change drivers mid-year, and Benny went to Mr. Bannell and said, hey, is there anything we can do? He's been such an ambassador to the sport. He's such a good guy, and he was obviously involved with us because of me being involved with Skoll. And so they decided they had a new product coming out called Wayman and Bruton. It was a chewing tobacco. Had a new product coming out, and Mr. Bannell and Johnny decided, we'll do that. We'll do 5 races towards the end of the year. We'll have Travis's team, Harry Gant team, prepare the car, and then we'll just take it to the racetrack. My Busch team will take it to the racetrack and pit the car and work on the car and whatever.
Now, is this for you or for Benny?
For Benny.
Benny.
For Benny in 1982.
Okay.
So we we actually, our Speedway car we had bought from Richard and Leo Jackson, and my short track car I bought from Tommy. Well, we had bought from Tommy Ellis, who had bought it from Richard and Leo Jackson. So I had a relationship with Richard and Leo because every time I got ready to go to the racetrack, I'd call Richard, whoever answered the phone at Precision Products in Asheville, Richard or Leo. I said, hey, we're going to Hickory. What should I put in this car? We're going to Rockingham. What should I put in this car or whatever? And they would tell me the setup. So that's what we did. And then we decided, Johnny said, why don't we get Leo, who we had a relationship, because he had helped us so much. We'll get Leo just to go with Benny when he runs those 5 races to look after our boys, the crew, and call the race or whatever. So that worked out well. Well, in the meantime, we said, well, if we're going to, why don't we get Richard to go with us? We'll have Richard go with us on the late model sportsman car too, and if he's not doing anything to help us a little bit. So we did that. Travis Carter totally prepared the car, and then we would just pick it up and take it to the racetrack. If I was racing there too, then most of my crew would be with me on the late model sportsman car, and we would just find some other people until we got done with our Busch race. Not the late model sportsman by then, it's Busch Series. Got done with the Busch race, and then we would take over working on the car, and Leo again would still be the crew chief and call the shots. But I remember one time we raced at South Boston on Saturday night, and they took Benny to Dover to run the Cup race the next day. So my whole crew flew up Sunday morning to Dover to basically pit the car, and I carried tires on Benny's car. I mean, I would run the Busch race, and then I would carry tires on the pit stops or whatever. So we ran that car 5 times, and I think we finished in the top 5 3 of the 5 times, and had another top 10, and then we had trouble in the other race or whatever. So that's what started the Cup deal.
Okay. Yeah.
For U.S. Tobacco and for Benny and for Johnny Hayes Racing at the time. So then we decided, well, we'd had a pretty successful year in 1982. We're going to run the Busch Series again in 1983, but let's get my feet wet running the Cup car, run 5 races in 1983, and while we're at it, we'll run Benny in 12 or 14 or 16 races in a second, or actually that would be the primary car. In the second car, I would run 5 or 6 races, or 5 races, which is all you could run to maintain your rookie eligibility back then. So we ended up building a shop, and it got it done, early 1983. In 1982, we worked on our Busch car out of Harry Gant's shop behind his house. Harry was driving for Skoll, and we would drive to Taylorsville every day and work on our Busch cars at Harry's shop. Andy Petrie was one of my guys. And Andy was actually delivering batteries at the time. So Andy, at night, after he got done delivering batteries and probably wasn't a very good battery delivery salesman because most of the days too he would be at the shop at Harry Jets and we'd be working on the cars and Gary Snipes and Scott Robinette, and then we had some guys that helped us on the weekend. But so in 1983 we said, okay, we moved into this new building in Denver, North Carolina, and then we got 2 cars ready to go to Daytona. My car to run the first of 5 races, and Benny's car to run, the first of 12, 14 races. So we hired some more people, and some of the people that were helping us on weekends on the Busch team, we hired full time, and that's how that deal got started.
Now, you ran the Daytona 500 that year, and for the first time, you're actually on the track with Benny in competition.
Yeah.
First time, as far as I am aware of.
Yeah, first time for sure.
What was that?
See, Benny never ran a Busch Series race.
No.
Yeah.
What was that like for you to be on the track with him?
It was pretty cool. I mean, somebody that I'd looked up for and looked up to my whole life, and I knew more about the stats of his career than he did. I mean, once you're doing it, it's hard to remember. But I knew everything he'd ever done or whatever. So it was, and he was so much help too, because that was my first time, and back then. Now we don't test much anymore. Back then, we probably tested 6 or 8 days over the winter at Daytona or Talladega, testing for Daytona. So we were together, so much there, and I had so many questions, and obviously he always helped me with it. So it was pretty surreal, really.
Your next race is Talladega, and that doesn't go so well. You
No,
end up
no.
on your lid 10 or 12, 15 times or whatever. Is there anything that you do remember about that accident?
Everything.
Do you really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. What do you remember?
Well, we qualified in the top 10, and a little side note, we ran a Buick at Daytona, and we felt like maybe it wasn't as good a body as something else. So remember, Cale won Daytona with Le Mans.
Yeah.
In 1983. Remember he flipped qualifying,
Right.
ran 200, and then flipped on his second lap, and had to go get the show car, which was a Pontiac Le Mans. And so they had made the switch to Chevrolet. The Harry Ranier team that Cale was driving for had made the switch to Chevrolet. So they actually cut the body off that Daytona 500 winning car, and we bought the body. And Johnny Seiler and Claude Queen put the body back on that Buick. We cut the Buick body off and put that Pontiac Le Mans body on that car. That was the same car that we'd run Daytona, but with the Le Mans body that had won the Daytona 500 with Cale Yarborough. But anyway, car was really good, fast. We were running the top 10. Had a caution flag for whatever reason, and then we had a restart. At that time, the lap cars were on the inside line, and lead lap cars on the outside line. Well, Darrell had some sort of problem and gotten lapped. And I was running 8th or 9th or something like that. And going in turn 1, by the time that Darrell had drifted back towards me running 8th or 9th, as we entered turn 1, we got together. And that got me out of shape, and then I ended up turning sideways and hitting the wall head on. And then the car just lifted up on the right side and just started tumbling down the racetrack. And I remember every time. The flipping isn't bad; it's the landing that's bad.
Yeah.
And I remember, the thing landed probably during those 10 or 11 flips, probably landed 3 or 4 times, and it lands really hard, by the way.
If it had just been that initial impact into the wall, that was a pretty hard lick.
It was a hard lick, yeah.
Once everything settles and everything, how long did it take you to kind of collect your senses? And I mean, I'm sure you're checking to make sure everything's still attached. And
well, it was everything hurt.
Yeah.
Right then, and it broke my shoulder. And I obviously didn't know that at the time, and I was upside down, but the roof was off the car and it was on fire. So I don't know how long it took me to get orientated enough to undo my belts. And it wasn't like you undid the belts and you fell and hit your head. I mean, I was basically laying against the ground anyway. And I crawled out through the passenger side window. We didn't have side windows then because it wasn't a big fire, but it was on fire. So I crawled out And then a couple guys grabbed me and drugged me away from the car, but it never exploded or anything like that.
The next week's Grand National scene mentioned that Benny radioed to his crew and told them to go find somebody to take over for him because he wanted to go check on you. I'm sure you didn't know about that at the time, but what was your reaction?
I didn't know about that till way later because, he had told me years later, I think that, or maybe somebody else told me, but it was a long time before. He said that was driving by and seeing my car laying there was the worst experience of his career. And again, it was years before I knew that, how it had affected him. I did know that he, and I don't think I knew it that day, but they said, Benny said, "Hey, get me somebody." They said he was just a basket case on the radio, and once they got the report from the Enfield Hospital that I was fine, I might have a hurt shoulder. It turned out to be broken. Then it was fine. He flipped a switch and went on to try to win that race. Ended up finishing second to the King.